People are failures not because they are stupid, but because they are not sufficiently impassioned. Burt Struthers. Chapter 10. The Will to Win. For most millionaires, the amassing of money eventually becomes a game. They no longer work because they need the income, but because they love competition. They enjoy pitting their skills against the business world. This instinct to compete appears to be inborn in most of us. Otherwise, the world would not enjoy games, and therein lies a very strong as well as very dangerous basis for motivating people. Sales organizations use this technique constantly, with contests that hold out a new car or a vacation trip or a prestige award at a yearly banquet. If one wants to motivate an elementary school to raise money for a new computer, the best way is to run a contest among the classes to keep the race as close as possible. If the daily totals are prominently displayed so that every teacher and student can see their standing and know that everyone else is looking at them too, the enthusiasm can build to a feverish pitch. The amount of the prize is not nearly so important as the thrill of competing. Charles Schwab, who supervised all of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills, had a mill manager whose men were not producing their quota of work. "I've coaxed the men, I've pushed them, I've threatened them with damnation and being fired," the manager told Schwab, "but nothing works, they just won't produce." It was the end of the day, and just as the day shift was leaving and the night shift was coming in. "Give me a piece of chalk," Schwab said. Then, turning to the nearest man, he asked, "How many heats did your shift make today?" "6." Without another word, Schwab chalked a big figure 6 on the floor and walked away. When the night shift came in, they saw the 6 and asked what it meant. "The big boss was in today," the men said, "and he chalked on the floor the number of heats we made." The next morning, Schwab walked through the mill again. The night shift had rubbed out 6 and replaced it with a big 7. When the day shift reported for work the next morning, they saw the big 7 chalked on the floor. So the night shift thought they were better than the day shift, did they? Well, they would show them a thing or two. The men pitched in with enthusiasm, and when they quit that night, they left behind them an enormous swaggering 10. Things were stepping up. Shortly, this mill, which had been lagging behind in production, was turning out more work than any other mill in the industry. And what was the principle? Here in Schwab's description of it. The way to get things done is to stimulate competition. I do not mean in a sordid, money-getting way, but in the desire to excel. The idealist will try to tell us that when we get people to compete against each other, we are using a form of manipulation and the aggressive instinct should be discouraged rather than encouraged. And such an impulse can help people achieve things they would never accomplish otherwise. Athletics provide a good example. Every runner, every swimmer, every football player knows that he or she performs best when pitted against others. It is the comparison, the desire to excel and to win that pushes them on. School rivalries, neck-and-neck competition with another company, list of the 10 best employees, these are all powerful stimulants. So rule number 9 for bringing out the best in people is this: appeal sparingly to the competitive urge. I say sparingly because competition has only limited usefulness. If factory workers are pitted against each other excessively, they will feel manipulated and they will resent it. Moreover, if too much aggression is unleashed among employees or students, they begin to stab each other in the back. At highly competitive schools, students will even steal essential books from the reserve shelf to prevent others from succeeding. These excess, however, do not disprove the value of healthy competition, and they should not deter us from using comparisons to stimulate strong effort. A Nobel laureate on competition. An ideal balance of cooperation and competition is to be found in the work of Arno Penzias, who in 1978 shared the Nobel Prize in Physics for his discoveries of what has become known as cosmic black body radiation. He is now vice president for research at Bell Laboratories. Penzias' family had barely escaped the Nazi persecution of the Jews, and when they landed in New York the first week of January in 1940, it was a foreign, alien world. His father eventually became a superintendent in various apartment buildings in the Bronx, collecting garbage out of dumbwaiters and stoking the furnaces. His mother went to work in the garment district. "I suppose everybody is unhappy in junior school," Penzias says. "I had a foreign accent. I never really learned kids' ways. By the time I could speak English well, I could not play the games well." He had a hard time in school physics, but he was able to go on to City College, New York, partly because the price was right, he says. meaning that in the tuition-free MIT turned him down for graduate school, and he enrolled at Columbia where he barely survived. They just let about everybody in. People came in with degrees in English, then they failed half the class. They just flunked everybody out like mad. It never seemed to occur to anyone that they were ruining people's lives. It seemed to me to be some sort of mechanical, mindless grinding of human beings. I will never forget my first exam. Towns gave it in an optics course. It was an open book exam with 5 questions. I couldn't do any of them. By the time I got to number 5, I was in a cold sweat. I was sitting in this room and I had just gone through the first 4 questions. None of them I could answer, not any one. I got to number 5 and I looked around and I saw that everybody else was working. I asked myself, what are the odds that I am the dumbest person in the room? I got a 54, which it turned out was the second highest mark in the class. Towns, as it happened, was just beginning to think about lasers, so he had wanted to learn about optics, and on the exam he asked about things that he was interested in. Penzias claims that he graduated by the skin of his teeth. There was 2 things that I was good at. One was that I had an ability to organize things in mechanical terms, to build things, and the other was that I had and have a great ability to endure pain. These were the 2 things that got me through Columbia. Would Penzias have been able to go on to win the Nobel Prize without first learning to endure pain in such a competitive environment as Columbia? It is hard to say, of course, but now that he directs research, he certainly has not eliminated competition. Nobody gives me a quota that tells me I have to turn out so many patients, he says. But there is pressure all over. Pressure from the Japanese who are competing with us, and pressure from within to help the light wave people, help terminal people, help switching people, help every single group as fast as we can. I demand a certain standard of myself and everybody else. Competition is a factor for highly motivated people. The trick is to know how to use it in balance. When comparison backfires. There is a fine line between using comparisons to criticize and using them to inspire. Comparison is ill-used when a wife says to her husband, "If Jack down the street works hard all day and isn't too tired to paint the house, why can't you?" Many of us have had that technique tried on us for years. Our parents said, "Why can't you bring home good grades like your sister?" Those are negative messages which debilitate us rather than empower us. Comparison, well used, says, "You know, Tom, when I see what the neighbors have done with their yard, it makes me want to get out and do something terrific with ours too. What do you think?" The simple listing of how people in the office gave to the United Way, for instance, can be a powerful tool for getting people to give more. They want to look good before their friends. Keeping in mind that the goal is not to shame them, but inspire them. We can impart the healthy message. If others can do it, so can we. It's an odd principle of fundraising that financial influence flows downhill. In other words, a good money-raising campaign solicits the biggest contributors first, then asks them to call on their friends. The friends may be capable of giving less, yet they will dig down into their pockets far better when called on by his person whom they know to be a generous giver. It is the old healthy competitive instinct. We do much less when we are capable until someone shows us greater possibilities. Anger as a motivator. We now turn to an emotion which is allied to competition, but which is a further extension of that passion, anger. Here again, the idealist might suppose that the only way to inspire people is to appeal to their benevolent instincts, but the best motivators usually appeal to the anger in people as well. Why? Because enormous energies reside deep within us and come to the surface when we get angry. Martin Luther said, "When I'm angry, I can write, pray, and preach well, for then my whole temperament is quickened, for my understanding sharpened, and all mundane vexations and temptations gone." A little righteous indignation seems to bring out the best in a national personality. The United States was born when 56 patriots got angry enough to sign the Declaration of Independence. We put a man on the moon because Sputnik made us mad at being number 2 in space. This motivational principle is well illustrated by Lee Iacocca's use of the Wall Street Journal. In 1979, the paper had published a scorching editorial criticizing Chrysler's mismanagement and saying that the nearly bankrupt company should be allowed to die with dignity. Iacocca got lots of mileage out of that quote. Rather than allowing it to damage him or ignoring it and hoping people would forget it, he turned it around and used it to arouse passionate sympathy for his company's cause. Here is an excerpt from one of his speeches. The Wall Street Journal advised me to let Chrysler Corporation die with dignity. After all, we were flat broke. Our plants were industrial museums. The Michigan State Fairgrounds were full of our unsold cars. I got mad. My colleagues in Highland Park got mad. Tens of thousands of Chrysler people all across America got mad. Our labor unions, our suppliers, and our lenders all got mad. We got so mad we banded together, we talked things over, and working together, we fixed what was wrong with Chrysler. We doubled our productivity. We rejuvenated our factories. We cut our costs. We started building the highest quality cars and trucks made in America. In short, we turned things around. Now we're selling cars and making lots of money. This story has a moral. Wonderful things can happen when Americans get mad. I think some well-directed anger can cure most of what's wrong in America today. Very few people listening to Iacocca's speech could keep from having some versatile reaction, for such a speech makes you want to support the underdog when anger is legitimate. Is anger seen as a negative force in the Bible? The Hebrew words that are translated anger or angry in the Old Testament occur almost 455 times, and nearly 375 of these refer to God's anger. Christ blazed with anger at the scribes and Pharisees, and the scriptures paint life in general as warfare. We wrestle against forces of evil, against principalities and powers of darkness. Any powerful motivational speaker uses the entire panoply of emotions to stir the listener, and anger is certainly one of them. Mark Twain was fond of saying that to hold a crowd you must alternate between wooing them and abusing them, and all good platform speakers, like good coaches, will occasionally display anger at their audiences. Moreover, they will be seen arousing anger in their people, as Iacocca did in his famous speech about the Wall Street Journal. The advantages of having a common enemy. Appealing to anger and the competitive spirit does another thing. It tends to pull people together. A large family may have lots of sibling squabbles at the dinner table, but if a child is criticized by someone from outside and the fact is aired at the table, cohesiveness builds in a hurry, and a congregation that is fighting internally can quickly forget its intramural differences if it is inspired to take on some common enemy. In fact, churches furnish us with interesting microcosms for watching how group morale is built and destroyed. For all our religious talk about love, I have never seen a congregation genuinely fired up which did not have the conviction that they were fighting some common enemy. The adversaries may be very different for different types of churches, but it seems essential to find something to oppose. Unscrupulous appeals to our anger. We must not overlook the fact that propagandists can fan the flame of hatred and horrible ends, and that wars and lynchings are also the result of group anger. Hitler aroused enormous energy and cohesiveness by using the Jews as scapegoats, and when Jim Jones convinced 912 people to commit suicide together, he did it by constructing a paranoid, illusionary world for his followers to hate. Both are illustrations of appeals to anger which have run amok. To avoid such perversions, we must appeal sparingly to people's competitive instincts, and we must choose our enemies carefully. There is nothing wrong with hate, so as long as it is directed at the right objectives. Cruelty, selfishness, deceit, manipulation, infliction of pain on helpless victims. Nor is it anything wrong with rallying a group to work harder because they are angry, so long as we give them legitimate objects for their anger and refrain from creating straw men in order to pull people to our side. Our world contains plenty of injustices, plenty of wrongs to be righted, and plenty of abusive people to oppose, without having to create any artificial receptacles for our hatred.